It was a gloomy evening, and David Mitchell had just finished a long day at the office. The rain pelted against his umbrella as he walked through the dimly lit streets of his hometown, feeling the exhaustion settling in. He turned the key to his modest apartment, ready to unwind and forget about the stresses of the day. Little did he know that his life was about to take an unexpected and eerie turn. As he entered his apartment, he noticed something unusual. The layout of the furniture was not quite right, the walls a different shade of blue, and the family photos on the mantel were replaced with unfamiliar faces. David's heart quickened as he realized that he was not in his own apartment. Panic surged through him as he scanned the room, trying to make sense of his surroundings. This place, though eerily similar to his own, was not his home. The world outside the window was cloaked in perpetual twilight. The rain that had been falling in his world had ceased to exist here. David's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation for this bizarre situation. Had he wandered into the wrong building, into someone else's apartment? But it couldn't be. The keys in his hand matched the lock on the door, and he distinctly remembered the familiar walk up the stairs. His heart hammered in his chest, and a wave of dread washed over him as he realized the possibility he had been unwilling to acknowledge. He had somehow crossed into an alternate universe, a parallel reality that closely resembled his own, but was distinctly different in unnerving ways. To make matters worse, David quickly understood that he couldn't let anyone in this world know that he didn't belong here. The people in this alternate reality might not take kindly to an outsider, and the consequences of his presence could be dire. With trembling hands, he decided to leave the apartment, keeping a careful eye on the details that made this place different from his own. The streets outside were eerily quiet, with muted shades of gray and a subtle feeling of unease hanging in the air. As David wandered through the unfamiliar streets, he noticed that the businesses were subtly different. The names of stores, the brands of products, and even the layout of the city were eerily altered. He realized that this was not merely an alternate version of his world, but a wholly distinct reality with its own peculiarities. Determined to find a way back to his own world, David couldn't help but notice that the people here were peculiar as well. They went about their business, seemingly unaware of his presence, but their eyes held a sense of unease and suspicion. It was as if they could detect something amiss, something not quite right about him. David decided to take refuge in a nearby cafe, hoping to gather his thoughts and find a way to navigate this strange reality without drawing attention to himself. He ordered a cup of coffee, trying to blend in with the locals as he observed their interactions. It was then that he overheard snippets of conversation that sent shivers down his spine. The patrons were discussing a recent incident, an event that bore a striking resemblance to a tragedy from his own world, but with subtle differences in the details. The realization dawned on him that even the history of this world had taken a different path. As David sipped his coffee, he contemplated his next steps. He needed to find a way back to his own reality, but he couldn't do it alone. He had to find someone in this alternate world who could help him, someone who might understand the nature of this strange phenomenon. But as he continued to eavesdrop on conversations and study the faces of the locals, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The people here were becoming increasingly aware of his presence, and the unease in the air grew thicker. In a world that was not his own, David had inadvertently become a stranger in a strange land. He had to be cautious, to navigate this alternate universe with care, all the while searching for a way to return to the reality he had left behind. But as he delved deeper into this enigmatic realm, he would soon discover that the boundary between his own world and this eerie alternate reality was not as clear as it seemed. In the days that followed, David Mitchell's life in the alternate universe grew increasingly precarious. Every moment he spent in this parallel reality was a tightrope walk, as he struggled to blend in and avoid drawing attention to himself. The eerie feeling of being watched never abated. It seemed that the inhabitants of this world were becoming more aware of his presence with each passing day. He had to be careful to mimic their actions, their expressions, and their mannerisms, all in a desperate bid to remain unnoticed. David found temporary employment at a small bookstore, hoping to establish some semblance of a routine and become a familiar face to the locals. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hastings, welcomed him with a knowing smile, as if she could sense the strangeness that clung to him. She offered him a corner of the store where he could rest during his breaks. The bookstore itself was an enigmatic place, filled with dusty volumes that held secrets he couldn't fathom. It was as if the very knowledge of this world was trapped within the pages of those books. He became an avid reader, delving into the texts in search of clues that might help him return home. One day, as he was perusing the shelves, he stumbled upon a peculiar leather-bound tome. Its pages were filled with writings that seemed to describe the nature of reality and the existence of alternate universes. David's heart quickened as he read passages that hinted at a way to bridge the gap between worlds. The book spoke of a rare astronomical event, a celestial alignment that occurred once every few centuries. During this alignment, the boundaries between dimensions would briefly weaken, allowing a traveler to pass between worlds. The book described a ritual that could be performed during this alignment to facilitate the journey. With this newfound knowledge, David began to study the night sky, searching for signs of the impending celestial alignment. It was a race against time, for the people of this alternate universe were growing increasingly suspicious of his presence, and he could sense the growing hostility in their glances. As the day of the alignment approached, David's sense of urgency intensified. He needed to gather the necessary materials for the ritual and find a secluded spot where he could perform it without drawing attention. The book had warned that the process was fraught with danger, as it involved willingly sacrificing a part of one's existence to traverse the rift between worlds. With the celestial alignment on the horizon, David retreated to the outskirts of the city, where he found a quiet grove beneath a cluster of ancient trees. The stars above began to align in the night sky, and he knew that his moment had come. He lit a series of candles, arranging them in a circular pattern, and recited the incantations from the book. The ritual was a harrowing experience, as he could feel a part of himself being torn away and cast into the rift between dimensions. It was a sensation of profound loss and disorientation as he passed through the ethereal barrier that separated the two worlds. When he finally emerged on the other side, he found himself standing in his own apartment, the one he had left behind. The layout, the furniture, and the familiar family photos on the mantel were as he remembered. He was back in his own world, a sense of relief washing over him. But the relief was short-lived, for the experience of the alternate universe continued to haunt David's thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that the boundary between the two worlds was not as clear-cut as he had hoped. In the days that followed his return, he couldn't help but wonder if he had truly left that eerie realm behind. The memories of the people, the streets, and the enigmatic bookstore lingered in his mind, as if they were imprinted on his very soul. David began to notice subtle changes in his own world, details that were eerily reminiscent of the alternate reality. The bookstore he had worked in, Mrs. Hastings, and even the peculiar leather-bound book all had counterparts in his own world. It was as if the two dimensions were intertwined, their boundaries overlapping in strange and unsettling ways. The realization that the two worlds were inextricably linked filled him with a sense of dread. He couldn't escape the feeling that he had inadvertently brought a piece of that alternate reality back with him, and that the consequences of his actions were far from over. As he delved deeper into his research, he discovered that the celestial alignment that had allowed him to pass between dimensions occurred once every few centuries, and the boundaries between worlds would continue to weaken during these rare events. David understood that he had merely scratched the surface of the mysteries that connected the two realms. He knew that he could not rest until he had unraveled the enigma of the alternate universe and found a way to sever the connection between the two dimensions. The consequences of his actions weighed heavily on his conscience, and he was determined to make amends. With newfound determination, he continued his studies, searching for clues that would lead him to the heart of the mystery. He realized that the journey was far from over, and that the boundary between his world and the alternate reality was a riddle that defied conventional understanding. As he delved deeper into the enigma that had become his life, David Mitchell understood that the boundary between worlds was a fluid and ever-shifting concept. The journey had only just begun, and he was determined to uncover the truth that lay at the heart of the eerie connection between his world and the alternate universe. The lingering uncertainty and the sense of an enigma that refused to be unraveled would become the driving force in his life as he continued to navigate the treacherous waters of existence, forever haunted by the echoes of the world he had left behind.